The air in Willow Creek always seemed to hum with a certain expectation, a quiet judgment. It clung to the old brick buildings downtown, whispered through the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining Main Street, and settled heavy around the grand, imposing homes of the town's founding families. Kellen Shaw had lived here all my 48 years, watching that hum evolve, sometimes into a comforting lullaby, more often into a stifling shroud. I was, I suppose, an observer by nature, a quiet confidant to many, and a man who believed in the inherent goodness of people, even when their actions belied it. My role in this town, in this story, was never to be the center, but rather the quiet pivot around which things turned, the steadfast rock when others felt adrift. Our town's heart, or perhaps its calcified core, was the Blackburn family. They weren't just wealthy, they were a dynasty, their roots entwined with every major development, every charitable board, every important decision made within Willow Creek's small, tight-knit community. Eleanor Blackburn, the matriarch, was a woman carved from granite and stubborn pride. Her husband, Thomas, was the quiet enforcer, his will a shadow of hers. They lived in a house so grand it seemed to exhale history and privilege, a stark contrast to the modest, comfortable home I'd inherited from my own folks on the outskirts of town. I'd known the Blackburns my entire life, served on committees with Thomas, exchanged pleasantries with Eleanor at countless town functions. They represented tradition, order, and an unyielding adherence to what they deemed proper. Their granddaughter, Clara, however, was a wild orchid attempting to bloom in a formal rose garden. From the moment she could hold a crayon, Clara saw the world in hues Eleanor could fathom. She was an only child, her parents having moved away from Willow Creek years ago, leaving Clara to be raised primarily by her grandparents, a decision made, I always suspected, under considerable pressure from Eleanor. I remembered Clara as a scrawny, curious girl, her hands perpetually stained with paint or clay, her bright blue eyes constantly searching for beauty where others saw only utility. She would often escape the stern confines of the Blackburn estate and find her way to my small art studio, which doubled as a local gallery and a place where I offered informal lessons. I wasn't a professional artist myself, not in the way Clara was destined to be, but I loved the quiet joy of creation, and I saw the spark in her, a fragile flame that needed nurturing, not smothering. Eleanor, of course, had grand plans for Clara. She was to attend an Ivy League university, study business or law, marry into another respectable family, and eventually take her place at the helm of the Blackburn real estate empire. Clara, however, had other ideas. She excelled in art, specifically abstract painting, a pursuit Eleanor openly dismissed as a frivolous hobby, a distraction from a proper future. Clara would quietly endure Eleanor's barbed comments, her thin shoulders stiffening under the weight of expectation. I saw it all, the quiet desperation in Clara's eyes, the way her smile faltered when Eleanor's gaze lingered on her latest painting, a silent judgment hanging in the air. The true breaking point came when Clara was 22, freshly graduated from art school in another state, a degree she'd fought tooth and nail to pursue, even if it wasn't the Ivy League degree Eleanor had envisioned. She had come back to Willow Creek, her spirit buoyant, hoping perhaps that success and a degree might soften her grandmother's stance. But it wasn't just the art degree that sealed her fate, it was Liam. Liam O'Connell was a landscaper, a quiet, kind man with calloused hands and a gentle smile, a man whose family had no lineage in Willow Creek, no wealth to speak of, and no aspirations beyond cultivating beauty from the earth. Clara had met him at a local farmer's market, where he sold unique, drought-resistant plants he'd propagated himself. Their connection was instant, palpable. I remember the afternoon Clara brought Liam to my studio. Her face glowed with a happiness I hadn't seen since she was a little girl sketching wildflowers in my garden. "Kellen," she'd said, her voice lilting, "this is Liam. He makes the world a little greener, literally." Liam had nodded shyly, his eyes warm and respectful. I liked him immediately. He saw Clara, truly saw her, not as a Blackburn heir, but as an artist, a dreamer. The Blackburns predictably saw him as a profound insult. Eleanor deemed him unsuitable, a distraction, a nobody. She forbade Clara from seeing him, issued ultimatums, and threatened to cut her off entirely. I heard about it from Clara herself, who came to me in tears, her brave front crumbling. "She says I'm choosing poverty, Kellen," Clara had whispered, her voice cracking. "She says I'm throwing away everything for love." I listened, my heart aching for her. I watched her struggle, the weight of her family's scorn pressing down on her. I told her then what I'd always believed, that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or lineage, but in the richness of one's spirit, the courage to be oneself. "Clara," I said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, "your art, your love, these are not weaknesses. They are your strength. Don't let anyone diminish them." Eleanor's response was swift and brutal. She didn't just disown Clara, she actively worked to erase her from the Blackburn narrative. Clara's name was removed from family trees displayed in the local historical society. Her portraits vanished from the Blackburn home, and her very existence became a forbidden topic among Alina's social circle. It was an ostracization so complete, so public, it sent shivers through the town. People, fearing Alina's formidable influence, began to avoid Clara, crossing the street, looking away. Willow Creek, for all its charm, could be a cruel place when its powerful families deemed someone an outcast. Clara, resilient as she was crushed. She had spent her early life fighting for her dreams, and now, for pursuing love, she was stripped of her family, her name, her sense of belonging in the town she grew up in. She and Liam moved into a small, rented cottage on the outskirts, far from the Blackburn estate, their only solace each other and Clara's burgeoning art. I visited often, bringing her supplies, sharing meals, offering not just emotional support, but also a quiet, steady presence that acknowledged her pain without letting it consume her. I saw the quiet fire ignite in her eyes, born from deep hurt, but also from a newfound clarity. She knew then, with a certainty that only comes from profound loss, that she would not let Alina's cruelty define her. She would redefine herself, and in doing so, she would reshape the Blackburn legacy. That was the seed, you see, of something greater, something beyond simple anger. It was the desire for vindication, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been stifled, dismissed, or broken by the rigid, unforgiving hand of tradition. If you're captivated by stories of quiet defiance and powerful retribution, remember to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. Clara's path was just beginning, and I, Kellen Shaw, would be there to witness every step, every transformation, every subtle shift in the tectonic plates of Willow Creek society. Act 1, the setup, had laid the groundwork. The betrayal was complete, the pain raw, and the seed of revenge, not of vengeance but of justice, had been firmly planted in Clara's resolute heart. My role was simple, to be her witness, her anchor, her moral compass, ensuring that the righteous fire within her purified, rather than consumed. The initial months after Clara's disownment were a desolate landscape for her. She was adrift, cut off from a world she had known, a world that had now actively turned its back. Willow Creek, small as it was, became a minefield of averted gazes and whispered judgments. People who had once greeted her warmly now hurried past, their eyes fixed on the pavement. The Blackburn name, once a shield, was now a brand of shame in the community's silent condemnation. Liam was her unwavering son in this winter, his quiet strength a constant comfort, his belief in her never wavering. He worked tirelessly, expanding his small landscaping business and bringing home every spare cent to support them. Clara, for her part, channeled her anguish into her art. Her paintings, once vibrant and abstract, took on a darker, more complex tone. The colors were still there, but interwoven with shadows, with lines that spoke of confinement and yearning. She painted the grandeur of the Blackburn estate, but twisted, its perfect lines fracturing, its imposing presence becoming oppressive. She painted the faces of the townspeople, their eyes downcast, their mouths tight with unspoken fear. Her canvas became a silent scream, a testament to the suffocating judgment she felt. I continued to visit, slipping away from my own routines to check on her, to bring her food, art supplies, or simply to sit with her in quiet companionship. She rarely spoke of her grandparents, but the hurt was a visible shroud around her. One afternoon, as she meticulously brushed dark crimson onto a canvas that depicted a beautiful, caged bird, she finally broke her silence. "Kellen," she said, her voice low, raspy from disuse, "how do you forgive something like this? How do you move past it when they've tried to erase you, not just from their lives, but from this town?" I paused, considering my words carefully. I was a man of peace, but I understood the deep ache of injustice. Forgiveness, Clara, isn't always about letting the other person off the hook. Sometimes it's about freeing yourself from the bitterness that binds you to them, but that doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you let their actions stand as right or just. She turned, her eyes, once so bright, now held a haunted look. "So what does it mean then, to not forget?" "It means," I said, "that you acknowledge the wrong done to you. And sometimes it means you find a way to show them and the world the truth, not out of malice, Clara, but out of a fierce, unyielding need for honesty, for what is right." Her gaze lingered on the painting, then hardened slightly. "Honesty," she repeated, tasting the word. "The Blackburns don't know the meaning of honesty, not really, not beneath all their polished veneers." That was the turning point. From that day on, Clara's art shifted again. It retained its emotional depth, but a new sharpness emerged, an almost investigative quality. She began to subtly incorporate elements she'd overheard as a child, fragments of hushed conversations about land deals, zoning changes, and donations that seemed to align suspiciously with profitable outcomes for the Blackburns. She never stated anything directly, but the imagery was potent. A pristine facade with cracks that revealed murky foundations, gleaming financial ledgers with a single dark stain, figures in opulent clothing with subtly distorted, grasping hands. Her artistic output became prodigious. She worked day and night, fueled by a purpose that transcended mere self-expression. Liam, seeing the transformation, cleared out their small shed, converting it into a proper studio for her, building shelves for her paints and installing better lighting. He was her quiet enabler, believing in her vision without needing to fully understand its depths. As Clara honed her craft, I began to do my own quiet observing. Eleanor and Thomas, convinced they had effectively dealt with Clara, continued their lives of public philanthropy and private control. They launched a new campaign to beautify Willow Creek, acquiring several key properties downtown, including the old, dilapidated theater that had once been the town's pride. Eleanor declared her intention to restore it as a cultural center, a grand gesture that garnered much applause and even more tax breaks. But I heard whispers, as I always did in Willow Creek, about the theater's original owner, a stubborn old man who had suddenly agreed to sell after years of refusing the Blackburns' offers, only to then move out of town with startling speed. I started digging, not overtly, but by listening, by asking casual questions at the diner, at the hardware store, at the weekly market. I learned that the old theater owner, Mr. Hemlock, had been facing a series of inexplicable fines and zoning violations on his other, smaller properties, making his life increasingly difficult. The kind of harassment that only stops when you give in to the right people. It was exactly the kind of subtle pressure the Blackburns were masters of. They never left fingerprints, just a trail of despair and eventual compliance. Clara, meanwhile, was preparing for her first major exhibition. Not in Willow Creek, of course. No gallery here would dare cross the Blackburns. She was aiming for Tulsa, a much larger city where her name or lack thereof wouldn't carry the same weight. She called the collection Undercurrents, and the invitation she designed was deliberately understated, featuring a stark image of a willow branch, its roots submerged in murky water. Kellen, she told me one evening, her eyes alight with a fierce determination, this isn't just about my art. It's about speaking for all the quiet injustices, for all the people who were squeezed out or silenced because they didn't fit, because they didn't bend. Her resolve was absolute. She wasn't seeking to destroy, but to expose. And exposure for a family like the Blackburns was a far more potent weapon than any direct attack. Their power rested entirely on their carefully curated image, their spotless reputation, their perceived benevolence. Take that away, and what were they? Just another greedy, grasping family. The exhibition opened in Tulsa, and it was a revelation. Critics praised her raw emotion, her innovative use of symbolism, the unsettling truth in her brushstrokes. Her paintings, subtle yet devastating, depicted the hypocrisy, the quiet corruption that festered beneath the veneer of small-town respectability. A painting of a grand white building with a crack running down its side, bleeding a muddy brown. Another, a family portrait, but with shadows distorting the features, turning smiles into sneers. One piece, titled The Architect's Price, depicted a skeletal hand emerging from a pile of cash, reaching for a deed of sale. It didn't name names, but anyone from Willow Creek, anyone who knew the Blackburns' modus operandi, could recognize the chilling truth. Word trickled back to Willow Creek, as it always does. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright discussions. Have you seen Clara Blackburn's art? People would ask, their voices hushed. It's unsettling, but true. Eleanor, of course, dismissed it as the bitter ramblings of a troubled girl, but I saw the subtle shift in her demeanor, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way she clutched her handbag a little tighter at church. Her control was no longer absolute. The fabric of her carefully woven reality was beginning to fray. This was Act 2, the struggle, where the obstacles mounted, but so did Clara's strength. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, her pain transforming into purpose. My role was to watch, to offer silent encouragement, to be the unwavering belief in her when the world turned cold. It wasn't an easy path for her, not by a long shot. There were moments of despair, of doubt, when she wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she was merely stooping to their level. But each time I reminded her of the difference between vengeance and justice, between destruction and revelation. Her path was one of truth, not spite. And if you're finding this unraveling of truth as compelling as I did, consider becoming a part of our community. Remember to subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. There's always another layer to peel back, another story waiting to be told. The exhibition's success emboldened Clara. She began receiving commissions, her name growing in the regional art scene. But the true, deeper impact was felt back home in Willow Creek, where her art had become a forbidden, yet utterly irresistible, topic of conversation. The Blackburns' carefully cultivated image, built over generations, was subtly, surely eroding. The whispers were no longer just about Clara's choices, they were about the Blackburns' character. And that, I knew, was a far more dangerous wound for them. The weeks that followed were a tense, silent countdown. Sarah Jenkins, the investigative reporter, was a whirlwind of activity, her presence in Willow Creek a barely contained hum of professional diligence. She was respectful, quiet, but relentlessly thorough. She spoke to old-timers in hushed tones over coffee at the diner, interviewed former Blackburn employees who had long since left town, and spent countless hours poring over archived property records at the county courthouse. Each interview, each retrieved document, was another thread in the tapestry of the Blackburns' deceit. I continued my quiet support, easing Sarah's access to the community, helping her navigate the subtle nuances of Willow Creek's social landscape, where what wasn't asterisk said often spoke volumes. I introduced her to a retired county clerk, a woman I had known for decades, who, after much gentle persuasion and the undeniable weight of Sarah's initial findings, reluctantly confirmed certain irregularities she had observed in old land transfers, things that had always bothered her but which she had been too intimidated to challenge. Leaner Blackburn, meanwhile, seemed to be shrinking. Her once imperious posture was now slightly stooped. Her voice, usually a booming command, had thinned to a reedy demand. The constant murmurings, the cautious glances from former allies, the subtle shift in the town's social dynamic, it was all chipping away at her carefully constructed persona. The Blackburn name, once synonymous with generosity and civic duty, was now whispered with a new, uncomfortable prefix. The Blackburns, you know, those Blackburns. Clara, on the other hand, blossomed. She had found her voice, not just through her art but through her actions. She was no longer defined by her past, by Aliner's dismissal. She was defined by her courage, by her unwavering commitment to justice. She continued to paint, her new works reflecting a sense of liberation, of clarity. The shadows were still there, but now they were retreating, replaced by strong, resolute light. The day the article broke was a Tuesday, the day the Willow Creek Gazette was delivered, but it wasn't the local paper that carried the main blow. It was the Oklahoma City Daily, a much larger, more influential paper that published Sarah Jenkins's expose. The headline screamed, "Willow Creek Dynasty built on deceit, decades of alleged land fraud and influence peddling exposed." The article was meticulously researched, damning in its detail. It laid out in clear, concise prose the systematic methods the Blackburn family had employed for generations, the strategic undervaluation of properties, the coercive tactics used to force sales, the creation of shell corporations to obscure ownership and facilitate questionable charitable donations that funneled money back into the family's coffers while securing massive tax breaks. It cited Mr. Henderson's detailed accounts, corroborated by the retired county clerk and supported by compelling financial records and property deeds. It even included a subtle yet unmistakable reference to Clara's art, describing it as prescient and a visual testament to the town's unspoken history. Willow Creek stopped, not just metaphorically but almost literally. The hum of expectation and judgment I had known all my life was replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. Then, a roar. It began with phone calls, then shouts, then gatherings on street corners. The Blackburns, once untouchable, were now exposed, their gilded cage shattered. Aliner and Thomas tried to issue a statement, dismissing the article as malicious falsehoods from a disgruntled former employee and a resentful outcast. But the words rang hollow. The evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously presented. The narrative they had carefully constructed for decades, the one that cast them as benevolent pillars of the community, crumbled beneath the weight of incontrovertible truth. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The state attorney general's office announced an immediate investigation. The charitable foundations that had proudly borne the Blackburn name began to distance themselves, some even announcing audits of past donations. The beautification project, once Aliner's crowning glory, was put on hold, then eventually abandoned, leaving the half-restored theater as a stark monument to their unraveling. The most poetic turn of events for me came a few weeks later. With the Blackburns' reputation in tatters, their real estate holdings became liabilities rather than assets. No one wanted to do business with them. Desperate to offload properties and perhaps generate funds for their mounting legal fees, they put several key pieces of land up for sale, including the old theater they had so eagerly acquired. And who bought it? Not a developer, not a new corporation. It was Clara, or rather, it was a consortium of local artists and community members, quietly formed and funded with Clara as its leading voice. They purchased the theater for a fair market price, ensuring that the original owners, should they ever return, would know it was genuinely theirs, not acquired through underhanded means. Clara and her team planned to restore it, not as a monument to Blackburn legacy, but as a true community arts center, a place of genuine cultural enrichment, open to everyone, especially the young and the unconventional, a phoenix rising from the ashes of Blackburn deceit. The irony was exquisite. Aliner had disowned Clara for her art, scoffed at her chosen path, and now, that very path had led Clara to reclaim what Aliner had tried to erase, and in doing so had exposed the rot at the heart of the Blackburn empire. The town, once so fearful, began to rally around Clara. Her name, once whispered with disdain, was now spoken with pride and respect. She had not only survived, she had transformed Willow Creek, peeling back the layers of its carefully constructed illusions. My role as the quiet confidant had been fulfilled. I had offered validation, a calm perspective, and had subtly guided the flow of truth, believing that true community strength comes from protecting its most vulnerable members. I watched Clara, now a formidable figure in her own right, sign the papers for the theater, her hand steady, her eyes bright with a quiet triumph. She had proven that defiance could be a form of grace, and that the quiet courage of truth could shatter even the most formidable walls of power. It wasn't a revenge born of bitterness, but of a profound desire for justice, for honesty, and for the simple right to be oneself without fear of reprisal. It was a satisfaction that resonated deep within me, a quiet vindication for Clara, and for all those in Willow Creek who had felt the subtle, crushing weight of the Blackburn's unyielding control. The balance had been restored, not through violence or hatred, but through the patient, unwavering pursuit of truth. And that, I believe, is the most powerful revenge of all. As I walked away from the newly acquired theater, leaving Clara to her plans, a sense of peace settled over me. Willow Creek would never be the same. It was a story that reminded me, and hopefully reminded all who heard it, that sometimes the most profound revenge isn't about what you take from someone, but about what you build in their place. And if these stories of deep emotional journeys, of justice sought and found, resonate with your spirit, remember this. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. There are always more stories of resilience, of truth, and of the quiet, undeniable power of vindication waiting to be told.